The rain didn't fall gently that night. It came down hard, like it had been waiting for permission, like it had been saving up all day for this one driveway. My heels sank into the edge of the gravel as I stepped out of the car, and my knee flashed with that sharp old pain that always showed up at the worst time. The Gala lights were still glowing behind us. People were still laughing in the ballroom we'd just left, and yet somehow the estate in front of me looked like a different planet. Dark, quiet, cold. Then my husband, Mark, said it in that smooth voice he used when he wanted witnesses. "We have no space for you." Not quietly, not privately, not in a hallway with the door closed. He said it right there under the portico, while the valet still held his ticket book, and two couples from the charity board lingered by the cars, pretending they were looking for their umbrellas. And I remember thinking, not about my dress, not about my makeup, not even about the humiliation, but about one simple thing. How do you tell a woman there's no space for her in the house she helped build? How do you say it like it's reasonable? And how did he already look so sure I would obey? My fingers were still clutching my little evening bag like it was a life raft. I kept patting the inside pocket for my reading glasses, and of course they weren't there because I'd taken them out at the dinner table earlier and set them down like an idiot. I told myself I'd grab them later. I told myself I had time. Mark stepped closer. His tuxedo was still perfect, not one wrinkle. His hair looked the same as it had when the photographer asked us to smile on the red carpet. And beside him, half a step behind, like she belonged there, stood his mother, Judith, wearing pearls that weren't hers and a thin smile that was. And then, in the doorway, just inside the glass, I saw her. Brooke, not a guest, not staff, not a neighbor who wandered in by mistake. Brooke, in a black dress I recognized because I'd signed off on the purchase months ago, when Mark said it was for a silent auction basket. She was holding a champagne flute like she'd been doing it her whole life, and she looked at me the way people look at a chair they've decided to move to a different room, like I was furniture. My stomach turned so hard I thought I might actually vomit on the stone steps. I tried to speak. I did. I tried. But the only sound that came out of me was a small breath, and then Mark lifted his hand, palm out, like he was calming a stranger. "Clara, don't do this here." "Don't do what, Mark?" I wanted to ask. "Exist? Refuse? Remember who paid for the roof over our heads?" Judith touched his arm and sighed like I was exhausting her. She looked past me at the cars, the people, the watching, and she said, "Honey, we all want what's best. This is for the good of the family, like I wasn't part of it." Brooke's voice floated from inside, soft as a pillow, sharp as a knife. "She can stay at a hotel. It's not forever, like she was being generous." My hands shook. I almost didn't do anything. Almost. There's a kind of paralysis that hits when your humiliation is public. Your brain starts trying to negotiate with reality. Maybe I misheard. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe the lock is just stuck. So I tried the handle anyway. It didn't move. Mark's eyes dropped to my hand, and he said, "I changed them this afternoon. The old locks weren't safe. Not safe." He said it like I was a threat to my own home. I turned and looked down the driveway, and at the end, through the rain, I saw the taillights of the last Gala couple pulling away, slow enough to watch, fast enough to avoid involvement. The gravel made that crunching sound, the one you hear when somebody leaves you behind, and that was when it hit me, clean and brutal. This wasn't a fight. This was an eviction. So why did my husband need it to happen tonight, right after the Gala, right after everyone saw us smiling like a perfect couple? And why did Brooke look like she already knew exactly where the silverware drawer was? I put my evening bag on the stone bench, and I heard my own voice, thin and steady, ask one question I never imagined I'd ask in my own driveway. Where am I supposed to go? Mark didn't even flinch. "Clara, you're not listening. There is no space for you here anymore." And somewhere inside the house, a door closed softly, like someone was already settling in. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. Just a reminder, this is a fictional dramatization for entertainment only. It's not professional legal, medical, or financial advice. Viewer discretion is advised. Enjoy the rest of the video. I slept in my car that night, not because I couldn't afford a hotel, not because I was helpless, because I couldn't move. I sat there with the seat tilted back, rain tapping the windshield, and I stared at the dark outline of the house like it might blink and become normal again. I kept wiping my face, not because I was crying loudly, but because tears kept sliding down, and I hated the feeling of them drying on my skin. At some point, my phone battery hit that red low warning, and I had to decide who to call. A friend? A neighbor? My daughter? Or the one person my father insisted I never lose contact with, even when life seemed stable? The trust lawyer. Her name was Denise Harper. I hadn't spoken to Denise in months, not because she wasn't important, but because everything felt fine. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't announce itself. It waits until you're comfortable. I stared at Denise's name on my screen, thumb hovering, and I felt guilt twist in my chest. I stayed quiet too long. I told myself it wasn't my place to micromanage anymore, and now I was sitting in a damp car in formal wear, locked out of my own house, while my husband stood inside with another woman. So I called. The line rang twice. Then Denise's calm voice answered, like she'd been expecting me. Clara? That house wasn't just a house. It was a legacy. It sat back from the road on a long, winding drive, the kind people whisper about at church potlucks and neighborhood barbecues. The kind they assume you inherited without earning. They don't see the years you pay property taxes that could have bought a second home. They don't see the mortgage payments from the early days. They don't see the nights you sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and bills, and the fear that your retirement account would never be enough. Mark and I built our life on paper and pressure. We started with a small family business, a property maintenance company, just the two of us and a used truck and a stack of invoices. I handled payroll. I handled the contracts. I handled the late-night calls from tenants and vendors. Mark handled the charm, the handshakes, the speeches. And when my father died, I didn't just get grief, I got responsibility. Because the estate wasn't left to me the simple way people imagine. My father was careful. He'd lived through enough to know charm can turn into control. So he placed the house and certain assets into a trust, the Clara Family Trust. I didn't even like the name at first. It felt too formal, too cold. But my father had looked me in the eyes, the last year he was alive, and he said something that sounded innocent at the time. Never let anyone tell you there's no space for you in your own home. He said it like a joke, like advice, like something a father says to a daughter because he loves her. That night under the portico, it didn't feel like advice. It felt like prophecy. And here's the thing that made my throat tighten even more. We had 30 days. 30 days until a closing Mark had been handling. 30 days until something financial and final was supposed to happen with this house. Something I'd pushed to the back of my mind because I trusted him. Because I was tired. Because I told myself it wasn't my place to question every detail. So why did he choose tonight? Why say it in front of witnesses? And why did Brooke look so calm, like she'd already moved into my life in her head? The driveway lights flickered in the rain, and my phone buzzed in my hand like it was trying to warn me. And I stared at the locked door, wondering what else had already been decided without me. Denise didn't waste time. That's what I always respected about her. Where are you? She asked. In my driveway, I said, and my voice cracked on the word driveway like it didn't belong to me anymore. Okay, she said. Listen carefully. Do you have the trust binder? I let out a bitter laugh. It's inside, I said, and the locks are changed. Silence, then a small exhale. All right, then we build proof the hard way. Do you have any documents at all? Emails? Texts? Anything about this closing? We need a trail. I reached into my bag and pulled out the one thing I always carried, even to a gala, even in an evening dress, a folded envelope with a few printed pages, notes I'd made when Mark talked too fast, and I felt that old instinct to write something down. My fingers trembled as I unfolded them under the weak car light, and there it was, a meeting invite from 2 weeks ago, printed because I didn't trust myself to remember. A calendar note, title company call, 3 p.m. And beneath it, in Mark's handwriting, a number and one word, escrow. Denise said, take a photo and send it to me right now. Then search your email for closing, escrow, appraisal, lien, anything like that. We need a trail. My phone buzzed again as she spoke. A text from Mark. Don't embarrass yourself. Go somewhere else. We'll talk in the morning. We'll talk in the morning. As if he still controlled time. As if he still controlled the narrative. As if he hadn't just put me outside like trash after a charity gala in front of people who would gossip about me over coffee by Sunday. The next morning, I didn't go to a hotel. I went to a diner, I looked ridiculous walking in at 7 a.m. in last night's dress under a borrowed coat I'd found in my trunk, hair pinned wrong, mascara smudged. The hostess looked me up and down like she was trying to place me. But I needed coffee. I needed light. I needed witnesses of my own. I sat in a booth near the window and wrapped my hands around the mug, and the heat made my fingers stop shaking just a little. I searched my phone while the clink of plates and low morning chatter filled the space, and I found something that made my stomach drop. An email from Mark, sent 3 days ago. Subject: Final documents for signature. It was addressed to me, but I had never seen it, because it had been sent to an old email alias I rarely checked, one connected to the trust paperwork years ago. An address Mark knew existed because he'd been there when it was created. Attached were PDFs. The language was formal, dense, and at the bottom of the thread, a reply from someone whose name I didn't recognize. Thank you, Mark. We'll be ready for Friday's closing. Friday. Not 30 days. Not later. Friday. I felt my throat tighten. My coffee went cold between my palms. Denise texted me like she could feel my panic through the air. Office. Today. Noon. Bring everything. I stared at that word, everything, and realized I didn't even know what everything was yet. How much had Mark been doing behind my back? How many doors had he already opened? And how many people had been smiling at me last night while they watched me walk into a trap? By noon, I was sitting in Denise Harper's office, the kind of place that smells like paper and lemon cleaner and quiet authority. A small building near the courthouse, not fancy, not loud, but solid. Denise slid a legal pad across the table and placed my printed emails beside it like we were building a wall brick by brick. Tell me exactly what happened, she said. So I did. I told her about the gala, the driveway, the locks, Judith's pearls, Brooke's dress. And while I talked, Denise didn't react with shock the way friends do. She reacted with calculation. She asked, "Did he say the words 'no space' for you?" "Yes," I said. "Did anyone hear him?" "Yes. 2 couples by the valet, and the valet himself." "Did he put anything in writing? Texts? Emails?" I showed her the text. "Don't embarrass yourself." Denise's mouth tightened just a fraction. Then she said, "Clara, I need you to understand something. This isn't only a marital issue. If that trust is structured the way your father intended, Mark may have very little legal control over the estate, but he can still cause damage if he's trying to move money, create debt, or cloud the title with liens." Cloud the title. The phrase hit me like a slap, because it sounded like weather, but it meant something terrifying. It meant Mark could make my house hard to sell, hard to protect, hard to claim, simply by dragging it into financial mess. Denise opened a drawer and pulled out a copy of my trust summary she'd kept on file. She tapped a line with her pen. "Here's the concrete fact," she said. "The house is owned by the trust. You are the beneficiary. There are conditions for trustee authority. Mark is not the trustee." I blinked. "He's not?" "No," Denise said. "He never was. So if he's arranging a closing," Denise's eyes lifted to mine, "then either he's lying to someone or someone's lying with him." My skin went cold, because that meant Friday wasn't just a date. It was a collision. Who was signing for me? Who was lending money against my house? And how many people were about to profit from my silence? I walked out of Denise's office with a list. Retrieve your trust binder. Secure copies of the deed and title. Pull county records. Freeze any transfers. Document the lockout. Identify witnesses. I didn't have the binder. The locks were changed. And going back to that driveway felt like walking back into a room where everyone had already voted me out. But I had to, because legacy doesn't protect itself. On the way, I stopped at my daughter Lily's apartment. I hadn't wanted to drag her into this, but she opened the door in sweatpants, eyes widening as she took in my rumpled coat and yesterday's hair. "Mom? What happened?" For a second I almost lied, almost protected Mark out of habit. That's how deep the programming goes. But I couldn't. I said, "Your father locked me out of the house." Lily's mouth fell open. "No," she said. "No, he wouldn't. Wouldn't." Even my child didn't believe it. And that was the first visible twist of the knife. If Lily couldn't imagine Mark doing it, what would the rest of the community think? Lily grabbed her keys and said, "I'm coming with you." As we drove, my phone buzzed again. A group text from Judith. "Clara, darling, let's not make this ugly. Think about Mark's reputation. Think about the family business. We'll make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable, like a chair in the corner. Lily read it over my shoulder and swore under her breath. I realized this wasn't just private betrayal. It was strategy. They were already shaping the narrative. And if they were shaping the narrative, what were they shaping legally? We turned onto the long estate drive, and the house rose through the trees like it always had, proud and silent. Except now, there was something new. A moving truck parked near the side entrance. My heart punched hard against my ribs. Lily said, "Oh my God." A man in a rain jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked toward us like he belonged there. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stared at him, then at the truck, then at the house, and I said the sentence that cracked my pride right down the middle. "That's my home." He hesitated. Then he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was told the homeowner authorized the packing." The homeowner. I looked at the door, the new lock, the security camera above it that I hadn't noticed in the dark last night, and I realized the first status inversion had already happened. Mark had positioned himself as the owner. I was being treated like an intruder, so I asked, "Who hired you?" He looked at his clipboard. "Mark Sanders," he said, "and the paperwork says the property will be vacant by Monday." By Monday. Moving day was Monday. If my house was supposed to be vacant by Monday, then what exactly was happening Friday? Lily grabbed my arm and whispered, "Mom, we need to call someone." "But who do you call when your own life has been relabeled without your consent?" I walked up to the door and rang the bell. My finger hovered a second. That moment of hesitation. My hands shook again, because part of me still expected Mark to open it like a husband, like a partner. But the door opened and Brooke stood there. Not Mark, Brooke. She smiled like she was welcoming guests. "Oh, hi, Clara," she said. "Mark told me you might come back." Might, as if I was unpredictable. I tried to look past her into the foyer. I saw boxes stacked near the staircase. I saw my framed photos turned face down against the wall like someone didn't want to look at them. Lily stepped forward and asked where her dad was. Brooke's eyes flicked to Lily, and for a split second, something like insecurity flashed there. Then it smoothed out. "He's busy," she said. "He's handling things." Mark appeared behind her, tying a robe belt like he'd been relaxing, like he'd slept peacefully while I sat in a car. "Clara," he said, "you're not supposed to be here." "Not supposed to be here? In my home?" I said. "There's a moving truck. People are packing. Who authorized this?" Mark didn't answer directly. "We'll make sure your things are stored safely," he said. "You can pick them up later." I'm being fair. Judith stepped into the foyer too, holding a mug of coffee like she'd been there all morning. She took a sip slowly, enjoying it. Mark said, "We're not doing this in front of staff." He meant the movers. He meant Brooke. He meant anyone who wasn't me. He wanted me quiet. Lily's voice rose. "This is disgusting," she said. "This is Mom's house." Mark's face tightened. "Don't disrespect me, Lily." In that moment, in my own doorway, I watched another inversion forming. He wasn't just taking my home. He was trying to take my daughter's loyalty, to make her choose him, to make her doubt me. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I raised my phone and started recording. Mark froze. Brooke's smile vanished. Judith's eyes narrowed. Mark said, "Clara, stop. That's inappropriate." But it wasn't inappropriate. It was proof. I said, "Mark, say it again. Tell me I have no space here. Tell me you changed the locks. Tell me you're ordering movers to remove my belongings. Say it clearly." His jaw flexed, and he didn't say it. He didn't say it because he knew how it would sound without the Gala lights and the perfect photo angles. He stepped forward and lowered his voice. "Clara, you're being dramatic. You're tired. You're confused. Let's talk later." Confused. There it was. The classic gaslight, wrapped in concern. We walked back down the steps, rain slick underfoot, and my phone buzzed again. An email notification. Subject, reminder, closing appointment confirmed. My breath caught. Friday was real. And if I didn't stop it, I wasn't just losing space. I was losing control of the deed itself. Denise met me at her office again that afternoon. I walked in with wet hair, a cheap umbrella from Lily's car, and my pride stripped down to whatever was left. I handed Denise the video. I handed her the email reminder. I handed her photos of the movers and the truck and the new lock. Denise didn't smile, but she did nod once, like a person receiving ammunition. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we do. First, we pull the county records. We confirm the deed. We check for any liens filed. We check for any transfer attempts. Then we send immediate notice to everyone involved in this so-called closing that you do not consent and that Mark has no authority to sign for the trust. My chest hurt. How could he even set up a closing without me? Denise's eyes held mine. Because he's banking on you being too ashamed to fight, she said. And because he's banking on speed. People make mistakes when things move fast. Denise asked me something that hit like a hammer. Has Mark been pressuring you to sign anything lately? Even small things? Even at the gala? My mind flashed to a week ago. Mark sliding a folder across the kitchen table and calling it routine. Just for the business. He'd pointed where to sign and smiled like a man doing me a favor. I had signed 1 page. 1. Because I didn't want to fight. Because I wanted peace. Because I thought it wasn't worth the argument. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly gagged. I said, yes. Denise's face hardened. What did you sign? I whispered. I don't know. I didn't read it carefully. I know. I was wrong. Denise didn't scold me. She didn't need to. She just said, that's how people lose houses, Clara. Then, softer. We can still fix it, but we need to see that page. That page was inside the house, inside the locked house, inside the space Mark said wasn't mine. That night, Lily insisted I stay at her apartment. She gave me an old t-shirt and sweatpants, and the softness made me want to cry again because it felt like the first kindness I'd had in 24 hours. I stood in her bathroom washing my hands, and the dish soap smell hit me, sharp and ordinary. And I had this surreal thought. My life is falling apart, and I'm worried about dish soap. Small details ground you when everything else floats away. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. A screenshot of a printed email. The top read, authorization to release funds. And beneath it, in the signature line, was my name, Clara Sanders. But the signature wasn't mine. My heart slammed so hard, I sat down on the edge of Lily's couch. Another message followed. You need to see this. Don't tell him I sent it. Tomorrow morning, parking lot by the county records office, 9 a.m. No name, no context, just pressure. Who had access to that email? Who was brave enough to leak it to me? And was this a trap or the first crack in Mark's perfect plan? At 9 a.m., I sat in my car outside the county records office, hands sweating on the steering wheel. The building looked plain, beige, unimpressive, like it couldn't possibly hold the power to decide a woman's future. People walked in and out carrying folders, sipping coffee, living normal lives. My knee ached, my stomach churned. I kept checking my mirror like someone might be watching. At 9:07, a car pulled in beside me. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out in a raincoat with her hair pulled back tight. Ruth, our estate manager. Not a guest, not family, not anyone who benefited from Mark's charm. Ruth had been with us for nearly 20 years. She knew where every spare key used to be. She knew which drawers were mine. She knew which closet held the old trust binder because she'd dusted it 1,000 times. She walked to my window and tapped softly, like she didn't want cameras to notice. I rolled it down. Her face looked tense, but her eyes were steady. I'm sorry, Miss Clara, she said. I should have told you earlier. I told myself it wasn't my place, and I was wrong. My throat tightened. Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. No return address, just my name. Inside were copies, printed emails, a meeting invite, notes, a voicemail transcription Ruth had typed herself because she didn't trust digital things to stay accessible. She said, I found this in the office trash, shredded, but the shredder jammed. I put it back together. I stared at the papers like they were holy. One email stood out, from Mark to someone labeled closing coordinator. Clara will sign. If she hesitates, we proceed anyway. Use the copy on file. Use the copy on file. My breath caught. That wasn't misunderstanding. That was intent. Ruth's voice dropped. There's more. I heard Judith talking to Brooke. Judith said, once Friday happens, Clara won't have a leg to stand on. Friday. The clock tightened again. Ruth slid one more page forward. A property appraisal. A number so high it made my stomach turn, not with greed, but with realization. This house wasn't just a home. It was a prize. Mark wasn't just kicking me out. He was leveraging the house's equity to fund a new life without me. I asked Ruth, who else knows? Ruth swallowed. The charity board knows Mark has plans, she said. The movers, the lender, some people from the business. They've been in the office late. They think you're unstable. They think you're stepping back, unstable. Mark was painting me as the problem. Ruth was risking her job to hand me the first real chance to flip it back. But could I move fast enough before Friday? By noon, Denise filed emergency paperwork. Real process. Real consequences. We drove to the courthouse, and the air inside was cold with that heavy recycled feel, like the building had been holding secrets for decades. The hum of fluorescent lights made my head ache. People sat on hard benches, holding folders like they were holding their lives. Denise walked with purpose. Clara, today we ask for a temporary order to stop any transfer, any lien, any closing, until this is sorted. In the hallway, I saw someone I recognized from the Gala board. Marianne. She stood there holding her own folder, and her eyes widened when she saw me. Clara, she said, cautious, like she'd heard things. Mark said you weren't feeling well. He said you needed space. Space. The word landed like poison. He'd told them I needed space while telling me there was no space for me. Denise's voice cut in, calm. Marianne, I'm Clara's counsel. It's important you don't rely on hearsay right now. Marianne's eyebrows lifted at the word counsel. The air shifted. Someone who'd been ready to pity me suddenly treated me like someone with leverage. Denise didn't smile. She just said quietly, "This is why we do it on paper." While we waited, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Mark. His voice was calm, almost tender. Clara, I don't want this to get ugly. Come home tonight. Let's talk. I'll make space for you. We'll work out an agreement. Just you and me. No lawyers. Make space for you. Denise listened once, then looked at me. That's not an olive branch. That's a trap. I wanted to believe it was peace. I wanted the false victory because the pain of war is exhausting. But I also knew the cost of trusting him had already been a night in my car and a closing scheduled for Friday. That evening, I did go back. Not alone, not unprepared. Denise told me not to. Lily begged me not to. But we needed one thing, access to the trust binder and that signed page Mark had slid across the table. Without it, we were fighting blind. I drove to the estate as the sun went down, rain still misting. I sat at the end of the driveway with my heart pounding like a drum. I almost turned around. My hands shook. I felt sick. I felt foolish. Then Ruth texted one line. Side door code still works. For now. For now. Another hidden clock. I walked up the side path, shoes squishing on wet grass, smelling damp earth and roses. Ruth always tried to keep alive, even when Mark didn't notice them. The keypad glowed. I punched in the code. It beeped. Green light. The door opened. For a second, I felt relief, like I'd slipped into my own life again. Then I heard laughter from the kitchen. Judith's voice, Brooke's voice, Mark's voice, low and pleased. I moved quietly, not because I wanted to spy, but because I didn't want them to know I was inside. Not yet. I headed toward the office where the trust binder was kept. As I passed the living room, I saw a new throw blanket draped over the couch, a different candle scent on the table. A handbag that wasn't mine, hanging on the chair like it belonged. Brooke was nesting. I reached the office door and my hand froze on the knob. Another hesitation. Because I knew once I opened it, I couldn't pretend anymore. I opened it anyway. The room smelled like printer ink and old leather. My father's desk sat in the corner. On it, the wedding photo of Mark and me was turned face down. I went straight to the cabinet where the trust binder should have been. It was gone. I opened drawers. Nothing. I checked the shelf. Nothing. Then I saw a thin line of paper sticking out from the trash bin. A torn corner of a folder. I pulled it out slowly. Stamped across the top in bold letters was one word that made my blood run cold. Resignation. I heard footsteps in the hall. I stuffed the paper into my coat pocket and turned just as Mark appeared in the doorway, smiling like he'd caught me doing something shameful. There you are, he said. I told you we could talk. Brooke hovered behind him. Judith leaned on the wall like she was watching a show. Mark stepped into the office and shut the door behind him, leaving them outside, and he lowered his voice. Clara, you're scared. I get it. But you're not thinking clearly. Let me handle the financial side. Let me protect you. Sign what I need you to sign, and I promise you'll be taken care of. Taken care of. That phrase is a cage. I asked, what do you want me to sign? Mark reached into a drawer like he already knew exactly where it was, and he pulled out a folder with a red sticker on the corner. He slid it across the desk. Just a consent form, he said. A temporary transfer of authority for the trust administration. It's routine. It's for speed. It's for Friday. Friday. The closing was Friday. He wanted my signature tonight. My hand hovered over the folder. I almost opened it. I almost believed him, because that's what love trains you to do. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Denise. Do not sign. Get the page you signed last week. Get out. Mark watched my face. He smiled gently, like a therapist. Clara, don't involve lawyers. Lawyers turn everything into war. I looked at him, and for the first time I truly saw what he was. Not a monster. A man with ambition and fear and pride. A man who tasted status at that gala and decided he deserved more. A man who couldn't bear the idea that he didn't own the house he lived in, so he decided to take it. He leaned closer. Sign, he whispered, and I'll make space for you again. Space. There it was, tied to the title, tied to the trap. I didn't sign. I stood up. Mark's smile faded. I said, I need to use the restroom. I'll be right back. He nodded, too confident to suspect I was running. I walked out of the office, past Brooke's watching eyes, past Judith's smirk, toward the downstairs bathroom. But I didn't go inside. I turned into the laundry room, where Ruth had once shown me a hidden cabinet behind extra supplies. My hands shook as I pulled it open. There, tucked behind an old bottle of cleaner, was a slim binder. Not the main trust binder. A backup. Ruth's doing. Inside were copies, the trust summary, the deed copy, notes in my father's handwriting, and one more thing. A photocopy of the page I had signed last week. My signature was on it. Beneath it, in small print I hadn't read, were words that made my knees go weak. Consent to encumber trust property. Encumber. Debt. Lien. Loans. My signature had been the key. I'd handed him the knife. I slid the paper into my coat like it was a stolen diamond. Then I heard Brooke's voice in the hall. She's in the laundry room, she said. Light and sweet. My heart slammed. I backed up, grabbed the nearest thing on the shelf to look casual, a box of dryer sheets, and stepped out just as Mark appeared. His eyes locked on mine, sharp now. What are you doing? I held up the dryer sheets like an idiot. I needed something, I said. Mark stepped closer, gaze flicking to my coat pocket. For a second, I thought he might reach for me. Then he smiled again, but colder. Clara, you can do this the easy way or the hard way. I said nothing. My throat was too tight. Mark leaned in, voice low. If you fight me, I will make sure everyone knows you're unstable. I will make sure the business sees you as a liability. I will make sure Lily knows you're the one destroying this family. That was the hidden cost. Emotional blackmail. Mark wasn't pleading anymore. He was threatening, but with a calm face that would look reasonable to outsiders. He wanted to be the hero rescuing a woman from herself. He wanted me to be the problem. I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I walked out into the rain with my coat damp and my hands shaking and my heart splitting. Behind me, the door shut softly, like the house was swallowing itself whole. By Thursday morning, the smear campaign had started. Lily showed me messages in the family group chat. Judith posting vague prayers about mental health and difficult seasons. Mark's cousin asking if I was okay. Someone saying they heard I'd had a breakdown at the gala. A breakdown. I had stood there and absorbed humiliation like a sponge. But in gossip, silence becomes weakness, and weakness becomes story. Neighbors started texting Lily, not me. A woman from church left a voicemail saying they were praying for me and that Mark had always been so good with money. Good with money, as if I hadn't been the one tracking debt, balancing credit cards, planning retirement contributions, making sure our 401k didn't get drained every time Mark wanted to impress someone. At noon, a certified letter arrived at Lily's apartment. No return address visible, just official postage and my name. Inside was a notice from a lender. Notice of intent to record lien if closing conditions are not met. My mouth went dry. Denise read it and said, "They're trying to pressure you. They want speed. They want you to panic and sign." I whispered, "I already signed something." Denise's eyes sharpened. "Then we fight harder." Denise called that night and said, "We have a hearing tomorrow morning, early. We're asking for an emergency order before the closing." A hearing, not glamorous, but decisive. I barely slept. My mind ran in circles. At 3 a.m., I walked to Lily's kitchen, and the floor was cold on my feet. I poured water and stared out at the parking lot lights reflecting off wet pavement. I thought of my father's words again. Never let anyone tell you there's no space for you in your own home. Back then, I'd rolled my eyes. Now it felt like the core of everything. At 6 a.m., Ruth sent another message. I found something else. Security footage. Office. He doesn't know I copied it. Security footage. Another piece of proof. I spilled coffee on Lily's counter, watching the stain spread like my anxiety. I cleaned it with a paper towel and realized something small but true. This was not going to be one with emotion. It was going to be one with process. Emails, footage, records, signatures, witnesses. Friday morning came like a punch. The courthouse hallway felt colder than before. The air conditioning hummed. People's shoes squeaked on tile. Denise stood beside me, folder thick in her hand. Lily sat behind us, jaw clenched. Ruth arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, cheeks wet from the rain, clutching a flash drive and an envelope. She handed them to Denise without a word, just a small nod. Denise opened the envelope and pulled out printed stills, security camera images from our office. Mark late at night feeding papers into a shredder. Brooke leaning over the desk taking photos of documents. Judith standing there with a mug of coffee, watching like a supervisor. Then one image that made my stomach flip. Mark holding the red sticker folder, sliding it across the table toward Brooke, as if he'd practiced the signature moment with her first. Denise whispered, "This is strong." The bailiff called our case, and we walked into the courtroom. Mark was there, in a suit, calm, composed, looking like a man who belonged in front of a judge. Judith sat behind him, pearls perfect. Brooke sat next to her, hand on Judith's arm like a daughter. When Mark saw me, his eyes softened, as if he was sad for me. Mark stood and said, "Your Honor, I'm deeply concerned about my wife. She's been confused. She's been emotional. I've tried to protect her from financial stress." Protect. He said it like he was noble. Then he added, "She doesn't understand the refinancing. She doesn't understand the business restructuring. She's reacting irrationally." The old inversion threatened to lock in. Mark looked reasonable. I looked like the wife causing trouble. Denise stood. "Your Honor, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a planned attempt to encumber trust property without authority, paired with an illegal lockout." She said illegal like it was a brick. Mark's smile twitched. Denise continued, "We have documentation of a closing scheduled for today. We have evidence of forged signatures. We have security footage of document destruction. We have witnesses." Mark's lawyer objected. The judge held up a hand. Denise turned slightly and looked at me. "Clara," she said quietly, "are you ready?" My throat tightened. This was the moment. If I spoke, the illusion died. If I spoke, the community gossip would explode. But if I stayed quiet, I would lose my home, my savings, my peace, my legacy. So I stood. I felt my knee ache. I felt my hands shake. And I said, "Your Honor, my husband locked me out of my home the night of a charity gala and told me, in front of witnesses, that there was no space for me. He changed the locks. He hired movers. He scheduled a closing to place debt on a house held in my father's trust, and he pressured me to sign documents without disclosure." The judge looked at me and said, "Continue." I said, "I have the page I signed. It authorizes encumbrance. I did not understand it. I was misled. And I have evidence he intended to proceed even without my consent." Denise handed the judge the printed email from Mark. "If she hesitates, we proceed anyway. Use the copy on file." The judge's eyes moved across the page. The room went quiet in that way that makes your skin prickle. Denise added, "We also have security stills showing him shredding documents and Ms. Brooke taking photos of trust materials." Brooke stiffened. Judith's pearls suddenly looked less like status and more like a costume. Mark's face tightened, just for a second. The judge ordered an immediate pause on the closing. An injunction. Temporary, but powerful. No lien, no encumbrance, no transfer. Not today. The closing was Friday, and Friday was now. Mark stood there, the man who thought he was about to fund a new life on my equity, and watched his plan freeze. But the real climax wasn't the injunction. It was what Denise did next. She said, "Your Honor, there's also an issue of business control. Mr. Sanders has convened an emergency board vote on Monday to restructure a company in which Mrs. Sanders holds majority equity through her trust. He has represented to board members that she is stepping back due to instability. "We have evidence this is coordinated." The judge asked, "Do you have proof?" Denise handed over Ruth's printed board invite, then corporate bylaws, then share records. Then Denise said the sentence that hit Mark like a car crash. "Mrs. Sanders owns the controlling shares." Mark's eyes snapped to mine. For the first time, he looked afraid. Not because he'd been caught cheating, because his power was evaporating, because he'd mistaken access for ownership, because he'd built his whole plan on the belief that I would stay quiet, and I didn't. My father's line paid off. The red sticker folder paid off. The shredder jam and the footage paid off. Innocent details that became devastating evidence. When we walked out of the courthouse, the rain had eased, but the air still smelled wet and sharp. Mark walked behind us, jaw clenched, Judith whispering in his ear, Brooke staring at her phone like she was trying to figure out what to do now. A reporter from a local paper asked Mark, "Mr. Sanders, is it true you tried to push your wife out of her home after the gala?" Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, his charm had nowhere to land. The documents existed. The court order existed. The truth existed. And all he had left was silence. Monday came anyway. But not the way Mark planned. The board meeting happened, but Denise was there. So was I. Not in a gala dress, in a simple blouse that was wrinkled because I'd pulled it from a suitcase, and I didn't care. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and printer paper. People who'd worked with me for years avoided my eyes, embarrassed by what they'd believed. Mark stood at the front like a man preparing to perform. "Clara has asked to step back," he said, "for her health." Denise stood and slid a folder across the table. That clean paper sound filled the room. "Clara has not stepped back," Denise said. "Clara has majority equity. Clara is exercising her rights, and given recent documented misconduct, Clara is calling for a board vote regarding Mr. Sanders's position." Mark said, "This is insane." Denise said, "It's governance." Then Ruth walked in, not in a uniform, in her own coat, hair neat, face calm. She handed the board chair a printed email. Mark's message about proceeding without consent. The chair read it, then looked up slowly. The room shifted. People who'd ignored me, who'd assumed Mark was the mind behind everything, suddenly looked at me like I was the one holding the keys, because I was. Mark wasn't the owner. Mark wasn't the savior. Mark was the risk. The vote happened. Not dramatic, not shouted, just hands raised, one by one, with heavy reluctance. Mark was removed from power, from control, from the seat he'd used to humiliate me. He stared at me like he couldn't understand. He didn't see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a man who deserved the house, the lifestyle, the access. He saw my trust as a technicality. He saw my dignity as an obstacle. So when the obstacle stood up, he was shocked. After the meeting, Mark confronted me in the hallway. "You ruined me," he said. I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, grief. Because you don't marry someone to become their enemy, but you also don't let someone steal your life because you're afraid of being seen as harsh. I said, "No, Mark, you ruined yourself. You just expected me to carry the blame quietly." Judith appeared behind him, face pale now. "Clara, you don't have to do this," she said. "Think of Lily. Think of the family." I realized Judith's motive wasn't pure evil. It was fear. Fear of aging without security. Fear of losing status. Fear of being the mother of a man who failed. Brooke stood a few steps away, eyes darting, calculating. She wasn't evil either. She was hungry. Hungry for a life she thought she could marry into. Hungry for comfort. But hunger can still destroy. So I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I said, "I'm not doing this to punish anyone. I'm doing this to protect what my father built and what I maintained. I'm doing this because there are consequences when you try to take space that isn't yours." Then I walked away. My steps sounded steady on the tile, even though inside I felt like glass. The weeks after were not magically peaceful. There were lawyers, paperwork, costs, fees that made my stomach ache, sleepless nights where I stared at numbers and wondered how much of my savings would be drained just to defend what should have been obvious. There were moments I missed the old life, not because it was true, but because it was familiar. Mark tried to negotiate. He offered settlements, agreements. He tried to make me feel guilty for the business disruption. I didn't move out of revenge. I moved out of clarity. Denise helped me restructure what needed to be restructured. We secured the trust assets properly. We updated records. We ensured no unauthorized liens could be recorded. We tightened procedures so no one could use the copy on file ever again. I sat at Lily's kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, my reading glasses finally perched on my nose, and I planned the next decade of my life with the same careful focus I'd used to plan payroll. I reviewed retirement contributions. I checked the 401k. I looked at the IRA I'd neglected. I assessed business cash flow. I reduced unnecessary expenses, not because I was afraid now, but because I refused to be vulnerable again. And in quiet moments, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Space, real space, the kind that comes when you're not shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. Ruth stayed with the estate, but not as staff under Mark, as an employee of the trust, protected, respected, compensated properly. The first time I walked back into my house after the court order, alone, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. The foyer was quiet. Boxes sat where Mark had left them, half-packed, as if the whole takeover had frozen mid-breath. I walked to the living room and turned over the wedding photo that had been face down. I looked at it a long time. Then I put it in a drawer, not because I wanted to erase the past, because I wanted to stop living inside its frame. On a Sunday a month later, I hosted dinner. Not a gala, not a show, just dinner. Lily came. Ruth came. Two close friends from years ago who had been quiet during my marriage came too, bringing casseroles and awkward apologies. The rain wasn't pounding that day. Sunlight hit the backyard in soft angles. I watched it through the window while I stirred gravy on the stove, and I realized something simple. I had lost a husband, but I hadn't lost myself. Mark and I weren't magically reconciled. We weren't enemies on the nightly news either. We were two adults navigating consequences. Lily kept a relationship with her father, but it was different now, healthier, boundaried. She didn't let him rewrite reality anymore. Judith stopped texting me. The silence felt like relief. Brooke disappeared from the circles that had applauded her presence too early. Not because people suddenly became saints, but because proximity to scandal is only attractive until it costs something. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't humiliation. It's letting people live with the outcome of their choices. One evening, months later, I walked into the office and opened the small cabinet Ruth had shown me, the one behind the supplies. Inside, I placed a new binder, a clean, organized backup of everything. Trust summary, deed copies, board bylaws, meeting notes, a simple checklist. Not because I wanted to live in fear, but because I had learned something the hard way. Legacy isn't just houses and money. It's knowledge. It's boundaries. It's the refusal to be erased. I closed the cabinet and heard the soft click of the latch, and it didn't sound like a lock shutting me out. It sounded like a door sealing something safe, and for the first time in a long time, when I walked through my home, I didn't wonder if there was space for me. I knew there was, because I had made it, protected it, and claimed it without apology. Thanks for watching until the end. If this story touched you, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. As a final reminder, this was a fictional dramatization for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, medical, or financial advice. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next story.